forgotten caves and sacred temples, ancient bones whisper secrets. But what if those secrets were about humans eating humans? Not out of hunger, but out of ritual, revenge, or something far darker. This is not just history. This is a mystery buried in flesh and fire, and its truth has never been fully told until now. In the Caribbean, beneath the sun-drenched beaches and the gentle sway of palm trees, a darker chapter of pre-Columbian history awaits. The Taino people, once the dominant indigenous group in the Caribbean, have long been remembered for their vibrant culture and their intricate social systems. But hidden in the shadows of their legacy is a controversial practice, one that has sparked intense debate among historians and archaeologists for centuries: cannibalism. The evidence for Taino cannibalism first emerged in the early 20th century, when researchers began to study skeletal remains found in ancient burial sites across the Caribbean. Marks on bones, unusual patterns of consumption, and the presence of human remains in ritual contexts suggested something far from ordinary. In particular, the discovery of ceremonial Zimi statues, often linked to religious rites, led to the unsettling possibility that human flesh was consumed during sacred ceremonies. Some scholars argue that this practice was not an act of violence, but rather a complex ritual, intertwined with the Taino's beliefs about life, death, and the divine. To consume a person, it was believed, was to absorb their spiritual strength and connect with ancestral spirits. Yet, others contend that cannibalism was a sign of desperation during times of conflict or environmental strain. While the true extent and purpose of these practices remain uncertain, the enigma of Taino cannibalism continues to challenge our understanding of indigenous cultures in the Americas. Was it a spiritual rite or an act of survival? The truth may lie somewhere in between, waiting to be uncovered. In the rugged, arid landscapes of the American Southwest, a chilling mystery has endured for centuries. The ancestral Puebloans, known for their advanced stone dwellings and sophisticated agricultural techniques, may have also practiced a dark and unsettling custom: cannibalism. For decades, researchers have examined skeletal remains discovered in the ancient ruins of Chaco Canyon and other sites, and some have uncovered evidence that suggests the Puebloans may have resorted to cannibalism under extreme circumstances. In the 1970s, archaeologists studying remains in the American Southwest found signs of ritualistic butchering, marks on bones that indicated human flesh had been cut, cracked, and consumed. The bones showed evidence of both violent trauma and signs of cooking, sparking a controversial theory that cannibalism was not only practiced but may have been tied to ceremonial rituals or even survival during times of famine. The evidence is divided. Some scholars argue that cannibalism among the ancestral Puebloans was a rare occurrence, driven by resource scarcity or social strife, while others suggest it was part of broader spiritual or ritualistic practices designed to absorb the strength or essence of enemies or ancestors. However, there are still conflicting theories. Was this a sign of desperation, a reflection of social collapse, or was it a deeply ingrained part of their culture, buried within religious or warrior traditions? The mystery endures. As researchers continue to analyze the skeletal evidence, one question remains unanswered. What drove these sophisticated peoples to such extreme acts, and what does it reveal about the complexities of their society? The shadows of this ancient practice still linger in the wind-swept canyons, waiting for the full story to emerge. High in the Andes, where the mountains seem to touch the sky, the Inca civilization once thrived, known for their engineering marvels, vast empire, and intricate religious practices. Among these practices, the ritual of human sacrifice stands out as one of the most enigmatic and chilling aspects of their culture. Yet, some scholars believe that these acts were not just about sacrifice but were linked to a far darker phenomenon: cannibalism. The Inca practiced capacocha, a sacred ritual in which children, often chosen for their beauty and purity, were sacrificed to the gods. These young victims were taken to high-altitude shrines and killed in ceremonies meant to appease the gods and ensure the survival of the empire. Their bodies, sometimes mummified, were left at these sites for centuries, frozen in the ice. But there is evidence suggesting that some of these sacrificial rites involved more than just death. Archaeological discoveries in the Andean region have revealed human remains with signs of butchery, cut marks on bones, signs of roasting, and traces of human flesh being consumed. Some experts believe that these acts may have been linked to the Incas' belief in the power of the human body, not only in death but in its consumption. By eating the flesh of sacrificial victims, they believed they could absorb the spiritual essence of the deceased, further strengthening their connection to the gods. The question remains, though, was cannibalism a widespread practice among the Inca, or were these isolated events, confined to particular regions and times? Did the consumption of human flesh symbolize power, or was it an act of desperation during times of conflict and scarcity? The truth behind Inca human sacrifice and cannibalism continues to elude scholars, caught in the mists of time, and as research delves deeper into this macabre practice, the answers seem as distant as the mountain peaks that once watched over the Inca Empire. In the dense jungles of ancient Mesoamerica, a chilling practice once flourished among the Maya, one that would leave behind not just ruins and artifacts, but unsettling questions about the rituals that define their civilization. Recent discoveries have revealed that, contrary to popular belief, cannibalism played a role in some of their sacred ceremonies. Evidence of this practice has been uncovered at various sites, notably at the ancient city of Uxacton, where archaeologists have found human remains bearing signs of violent injury and butchery. The bones show fractures consistent with the dismemberment of bodies, a practice believed to be ritualistic rather than purely for sustenance. Carbon isotope analysis has revealed that these individuals were not simply victims of warfare, but were likely part of religious sacrifices, offered to appease the gods and ensure the survival of their people. The Maya were known to be deeply spiritual, with a complex belief system revolving around deities linked to natural forces. Rituals involving human sacrifice were seen as essential to maintaining balance in the universe. Some scholars believe that cannibalism, in this context, was seen as an act of consuming the divine essence of the sacrificed, perhaps with the belief that doing so could transfer the power of the gods to the living. However, the full extent of the Mayas' cannibalistic practices remains elusive. Was it isolated to certain elites or widespread across the civilization? The answers, locked in the bones of the past, may forever remain shrouded in mystery. In the heart of the Aztec Empire, amidst towering pyramids and bustling marketplaces, one of the most disturbing rituals of the ancient world was performed: human sacrifice, often accompanied by cannibalism. For centuries, historians have debated the true scale and nature of these practices, but recent evidence has started to paint a clearer, if unsettling, picture. The Aztecs believed that their gods required blood to sustain the world. The sun, in particular, was thought to need nourishment to rise each day. Human hearts were offered in grand ceremonies atop pyramid-like temples, with priests wielding obsidian blades to tear out the still-beating organs. But what happened to the bodies after these sacrifices? Archaeological findings suggest that cannibalism was not only a ritualistic act, but also a means of absorbing the divine power of the sacrificed. Bones found at sacrificial sites often show evidence of butchery, and in some cases, human flesh was cooked and consumed, possibly by the elite or participants in the ritual. The act was believed to strengthen the connection to the gods and imbue the eater with divine energy. Yet, the full scope of Aztec cannibalism remains shrouded in mystery. Was it widespread or reserved for the highest echelons of society? Some scholars suggest that it may have been exaggerated by Spanish conquerors to paint the Aztecs as savage. But one thing is certain: the truth behind Aztec sacrifice and cannibalism is buried in the remains of their once great empire, waiting to be uncovered. On the remote islands of Fiji, a dark chapter of human history once unfolded, a chapter marked by ritualistic cannibalism. Long before Western explorers set foot on the archipelago, the Fijian people engaged in a terrifying practice that was both a symbol of power and a means of revenge. Cannibalism in Fiji was deeply intertwined with their warrior culture. Victorious chiefs and warriors would often take the bodies of their enemies as spoils of war, consuming them as a way to absorb their strength and ensure dominance over rival tribes. This practice, known as Matanatu, was believed to carry spiritual significance. By eating the flesh of the defeated, the victors were thought to gain their mana or life force. Historical accounts, including those from early missionaries and explorers, describe gruesome scenes of feasts where human flesh was served as a delicacy for the tribal elite. Some reports even suggest that the act of cannibalism was not solely reserved for enemies but also involved ritualistic sacrifices within the tribe to honor their gods or mark significant events. Archaeological evidence, such as human bones with cut marks and signs of cooking, corroborates these accounts, though much of what happened behind closed tribal doors remains speculative. While the practice is believed to have largely ceased by the 19th century, the full cultural context and extent of Fijian cannibalism remains elusive. Was it a widespread, long-standing tradition, or a practice reserved for only the most extreme situations? The shadows of Fiji's past may never fully be illuminated. In the isolated islands of Hawaii, far from the eyes of the outside world, an unsettling aspect of the ancient Hawaiian culture once thrived: cannibalism, often bound to the islanders' spiritual and warrior traditions. The practice, though not as widespread as other Polynesian cultures, was seen as a powerful and sacred ritual linked to warfare and religious belief. Cannibalism in ancient Hawaii was closely tied to kapu, a system of laws that governed all aspects of life. Warriors who defeated their enemies would often partake in the consumption of their foes, believing it would absorb the enemy's mana, an essential life force, and bring strength and protection to the victor. It was thought that eating the flesh of a defeated opponent granted the warrior not only their physical prowess but also their spiritual energy. Ritualistic cannibalism was also employed during significant religious ceremonies. Human sacrifice was made to appease gods like Pele, the goddess of fire and volcanoes, or Ku, the god of war. Victims were often selected for their perceived purity or status, and their flesh would be consumed by priests or high chiefs during sacred rituals, believed to ensure fertility, power, or victory in battle. The remnants of these dark practices can still be found in Hawaiian archaeology. Skeletal remains from ancient sites often show signs of ritual dismemberment, and oral traditions speak of human feasts that were held in honor of gods and kings. While the practice of cannibalism was officially abolished after Western contact, much of the true scale and meaning behind these rituals remain lost to time, leaving us to ponder: what role did the ancient Hawaiian beliefs play in the lives of their people, and how far did the reach of these ritual practices truly extend? In the dense rainforests and on the rugged shores of the Caribbean, the Carib people, a fierce and warlike tribe, were once believed to practice cannibalism as a key element of their culture. Early European explorers, including Christopher Columbus, recorded their shock and fear upon encountering the Caribs, who were rumored to partake in the flesh of their enemies. The Caribs' cannibalistic practices were likely tied to their warrior ethos. Known for their seafaring raids and violent conquest of neighboring tribes, the Caribs believed that consuming the flesh of fallen enemies would allow them to absorb their strength and courage. This ritualistic cannibalism was not indiscriminate. It was reserved for captives, especially those who had shown bravery in battle. By eating the flesh of these warriors, the Caribs believed they could transfer the qualities of the enemy into themselves, ensuring they remained powerful and indomitable. While much of the early European accounts were steeped in exaggeration and fear, sometimes referred to as cannibalism myths, there is evidence that the Caribs did engage in some form of ritualistic cannibalism, though perhaps not as widespread as first thought. Archaeological findings have revealed human bones showing signs of cut marks and butchery, but it's unclear whether this was ceremonial or a more common practice. The true extent of Carib cannibalism remains clouded in mystery. Did it symbolize a profound spiritual connection with their enemies, or was it simply a means of asserting dominance in a brutal world? As with many ancient practices, the answers may be forever hidden in the tropical forests of the Caribbean, leaving only whispers of a tradition that once captivated the imaginations of outsiders. In the remote forests of New Zealand, where the mighty moa, a now extinct, flightless bird, once roamed, A dark and enigmatic chapter of ritualistic cannibalism unfolded among the Maori people. The relationship between the Maori and the Moa, however, extended beyond mere hunting. It became a symbol of power, spiritual significance, and, in some cases, a reason for consuming human flesh. While the Moa itself was hunted to extinction by the Maori by the 15th century, the rituals surrounding its consumption are said to have involved more than just the birds. Some evidence suggests that after battles or sacrifices, the flesh of defeated enemies might have been consumed alongside the Moa, believed to transfer the mana, or life force, of the defeated to the victors. This practice was likely intertwined with spiritual beliefs in which the consumption of both animals and humans was seen as a means to absorb strength and divine favor. Archaeological sites have uncovered remains of both Moa and human bones with signs of butchery, indicating that, at times, human flesh was treated similarly to that of animals in ritualistic contexts. It is believed that those who partook in these rites were often high-ranking chiefs or warriors, with the consumption of human flesh marking a ceremonial act of power. But the full extent of Mataranga Maori, the Maori knowledge surrounding such practices, remains unclear. Was human consumption tied strictly to ritual, or did it serve as a practical survival tactic in times of scarcity? The Moa's extinction, and with it the ancient rituals surrounding it, may have sealed many of these secrets, leaving only the bones to whisper their story across centuries. On the isolated shores of Easter Island, where the towering Moai statues silently gaze over the ocean, a darker aspect of the island's history once emerged: cannibalism. Known for its enigmatic stone figures and rich cultural heritage, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, also holds a shadowy past of ritualistic consumption that is both chilling and complex. Cannibalism on Easter Island was not only an act of survival but also a deeply ritualistic practice tied to the island's social and religious dynamics. The Rapa Nui people were organized into tribal factions that often engaged in violent conflicts for power and resources. In these moments of warfare, the defeated were sometimes captured and consumed, particularly during periods of intense social unrest and resource scarcity, such as the aftermath of the island's ecological collapse. The practice was believed to carry spiritual significance. Consuming the flesh of fallen enemies was thought to absorb their mana, an essential life force, thereby strengthening the victor. Rituals of this nature were often conducted in ceremonies that involved the community and the gods, with cannibalism marking the final act of domination and the transfer of power. Archaeological evidence from the island reveals human remains showing signs of butchery, with bones that have been broken to extract marrow, indicating that some form of ritualistic consumption did take place. The scarcity of resources, particularly after the deforestation of the island, may have pushed the society to extremes, making cannibalism not only a cultural practice but also a tragic necessity. The true nature and extent of cannibalism on Easter Island remain a subject of debate. Was it a widespread tradition, or a ritual born out of desperation? With the collapse of their once thriving society, much of the island's mysteries, locked in its bones and statues, may never be fully understood. Across the vast Pacific Ocean, scattered among the islands of Polynesia, the practice of cannibalism was deeply entwined with spiritual beliefs, warfare, and power. For the Polynesians, consuming human flesh was not simply an act of survival but a complex ritual, believed to be charged with profound spiritual significance. Cannibalism in Polynesia, particularly in societies like the Marquesas, Tahiti, and Hawaii, was often tied to the concept of mana, an essential spiritual force that could be transferred through acts of consumption. The practice was typically reserved for times of war or religious ceremony. When warriors captured their enemies, consuming their flesh was thought to absorb the victim's mana, enhancing the strength and courage of the victor. This belief extended to the flesh of priests or chiefs, whose bodies were seen as sacred, and their consumption was believed to imbue the eater with divine power. Rituals often involved elaborate ceremonies. In some cases, human sacrifice was part of religious observances, especially during times of need, such as droughts or conflicts. The sacrificial victim, often a prisoner of war, was killed and their flesh cooked and consumed by the elite or priests. This ritual was meant to please the gods, ensuring blessings of fertility, peace, or prosperity for the tribe. While the accounts from early European explorers painted the practice as widespread and gruesome, the full extent of cannibalism in Polynesia is still debated. Archaeological evidence, such as bones with cut marks and signs of butchery, suggests it was indeed practiced, but whether it was as common as described or reserved for certain occasions remains unclear. The legacy of Polynesian cannibalism, though shrouded in mystery, offers a glimpse into a society where power, spirituality, and survival intertwined in ways that remain difficult to fully comprehend. In the rugged landscapes of New Zealand, the Maori people once practiced cannibalism, a ritual intertwined with their fierce warrior culture and spiritual beliefs. For the Maori, consuming human flesh was not simply an act of savagery. It was deeply tied to their understanding of mana, the life force or spiritual power that flowed through all living things. Cannibalism among the Maori was most commonly associated with the aftermath of battle. Warriors who defeated their enemies were often believed to absorb the mana of the vanquished by consuming their flesh. This practice was seen as a way of gaining strength and courage, enhancing the warrior's own mana, and ensuring that the enemy's power would not be used against them. The act of consuming the defeated was also a demonstration of dominance and a way of humiliating the enemy, further cementing the victor's superiority. The practice of cannibalism was ritualized. After a battle, the bodies of the fallen were sometimes cooked and eaten during feasts, where chiefs and warriors partook in the flesh of their enemies. These acts were performed with reverence, as part of sacred ceremonies that honored the gods and ancestors. Some accounts suggest that the flesh of particularly esteemed enemies or warriors was consumed during important events, marking a significant moment in the life of the tribe. Archaeological evidence, such as human bones showing signs of butchery and signs of cooking, supports the idea that cannibalism was indeed practiced in ancient Maori culture. However, the practice was not widespread across all tribes and declined significantly after European contact and the arrival of Christianity. The full depth of Maori cannibalism remains a subject of scholarly debate. Was it a widespread practice across the entire population, or more limited to certain tribes or specific situations? Whatever the case, the consumption of human flesh was part of a complex worldview where power, spirituality, and survival all intertwined, leaving a legacy that still sparks intrigue today. Among the Maori tribes, the Ngati Maru stand out in history for their involvement in some of the most chilling aspects of the Maori cannibalistic practices. Located in the rugged hills and coastal areas of the North Island of New Zealand, the Ngati Maru tribe were notorious not just for their fierce warrior culture, but for their ritualistic consumption of human flesh, especially during times of war and tribal conflict. Cannibalism for the Ngati Maru was deeply intertwined with their belief in mana, the spiritual energy or life force that could be transferred through the act of consumption. When enemies were captured in battle, particularly those who had shown bravery or skill, they were often subjected to a grisly fate. It was believed that by consuming the flesh of these foes, the Ngati Maru warriors could absorb their mana, becoming more powerful and more formidable in future conflicts. The practice was particularly intense during moments of tribal revenge or in the aftermath of intense warfare. The Ngati Maru were known to take prisoners of war from rival tribes and perform ritualistic cannibalism. The victims were often treated with a certain level of respect before their deaths, as their mana was seen as something sacred. After execution, the body would be cooked, and the elite members of the tribe, including the chiefs and high-ranking warriors, would partake in the ritual feast. This process, in the Ngati Maru worldview, was not simply about survival, but a spiritual act designed to maintain balance and power within the tribe. Archaeological evidence from the region, including human remains showing signs of butchery and cooking, supports the accounts of such practices. However, as with other Maori tribes, these cannibalistic rituals gradually faded with the arrival of European missionaries and the spread of Christianity. The exact motivations and extent of the Ngati Maru's cannibalism remain subjects of fascination. Was it a widespread, everyday practice or reserved for only the most extreme of circumstances? The legacy of the Ngati Maru's rituals lies partly in the stories passed down through generations, and partly in the bones and remains that continue to speak from the earth, whispers of a tribe whose spiritual and martial traditions were as complex as they were terrifying. In the dense, mist-covered forests and coastal regions of Alaska, the Tlingit people once practiced a form of ritual cannibalism, entwining it with their deeply spiritual beliefs and warrior culture. The Tlingit, renowned for their intricate art, sophisticated social structures, and seafaring prowess, also held a belief system where human consumption played a significant, though unsettling, role. For the Tlingit, cannibalism was not about sustenance, but rather about spiritual power and the transfer of strength. It was primarily a ritual associated with warfare and revenge. After battles or violent confrontations with rival tribes, it was believed that consuming the flesh of fallen enemies would allow warriors to absorb their enemy's power and life force, or XAAT, ensuring their victory in future conflicts. This act was seen as a way to assert dominance and prevent the enemy from coming back to haunt them, both physically and spiritually. The practice was also linked to the concept of purification. In some cases, when a Tlingit person was wronged or dishonored, they might seek vengeance not only through killing but by consuming the flesh of the wrongdoer, restoring balance and righting the wrong. While cannibalism was not a daily occurrence, it was a highly symbolic act reserved for times of conflict or spiritual need. Evidence from the past, including oral traditions and accounts from early European explorers, points to isolated but significant instances of ritualistic cannibalism. Archaeological discoveries also suggest that human remains found in certain Tlingit burial sites show signs of ritual dismemberment, though these practices were not widespread across all Tlingit communities. Like many indigenous cultures, the Tlingit's practices of cannibalism were gradually suppressed with the arrival of European settlers and the influence of Christian missionaries. However, the question remains, how deep were the spiritual and cultural beliefs tied to these practices? And what did they reveal about the Tlingit's relationship with life, death, and power? These mysteries, woven into the fabric of Tlingit tradition, remain locked in the shadows of history, awaiting a deeper understanding. In the dense forests and along the shores of North America, the Algonquin people once practiced a form of ritualistic cannibalism, a practice that was deeply connected to their spiritual beliefs, their warrior culture, and their efforts to maintain social and spiritual balance. The Algonquins, a group of indigenous people spread across what is now Canada and parts of the United States, believed that the act of consuming human flesh had powerful spiritual implications. Cannibalism among the Algonquin was not about sustenance but rather about absorbing the Manitou, a spiritual essence believed to reside within all living things. When a warrior defeated his enemy in battle, consuming the flesh of the fallen was seen as a way of absorbing their strength and Manitou, enhancing the warrior's power and connection to the spiritual world. This was thought to ensure that the warrior would be protected by the spirits in future conflicts, and could also act as a way to dishonor the enemy, rendering their spirit powerless. Ritual cannibalism was also practiced during certain sacred ceremonies or rites of passage. Young warriors, for example, might be required to eat part of an enemy's body as a test of strength and bravery, solidifying their role as a respected member of the tribe. It was seen as a way to connect with ancestors, who were thought to be present during such powerful spiritual acts. Historical accounts, particularly from early European explorers, describe the Algonquins' cannibalistic practices in the context of warfare and spiritual purification. Archaeological evidence, including human remains with signs of ritual dismemberment and burning, suggests that these rituals took place but may have been more symbolic than widespread. As with many other indigenous cultures, the arrival of European settlers and the spread of Christianity led to the decline and eventual cessation of these practices. Yet, the legacy of Algonquin cannibalism continues to spark curiosity and reflection, raising questions about the deeply intertwined relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds in indigenous traditions, one where death, power, and the supernatural were all part of a finely balanced worldview. The Huron people, part of the larger Iroquoian-speaking group in the northeastern regions of North America, once practiced ritualistic cannibalism, deeply embedded in their worldview of spiritual power, honor, and survival. Known for their complex social structures and rich cultural practices, the Huron engaged in this disturbing act, not out of mere necessity, but as part of a broader spiritual and warrior ethos. For the Huron, cannibalism was most closely linked to the aftermath of war. The Huron, like many other indigenous groups, engaged in frequent intertribal conflict, and captives taken during battle were often subjected to ritualistic execution and consumption. Consuming the flesh of defeated enemies was thought to absorb their strength, courage, and manitou, the spiritual energy that coursed through all living beings. This act, while gruesome, was believed to empower the victor, imbuing them with the essence of their fallen adversary. Cannibalism also served a symbolic function, as it was seen as a way to dishonor the enemy. By eating the flesh of their captives, the Huron would rob the defeated tribe of the ability to properly mourn or honor their dead, further demoralizing the opposition and securing the tribe's dominance. Additionally, the ritual provided a form of spiritual purification, ensuring that the warriors who engaged in the act were cleansed and blessed by their gods, ready to return to battle or return to their communities with renewed strength. While cannibalism among the Huron was typically restricted to ceremonial or wartime practices, there are historical accounts from early European explorers who describe the cannibalistic feasts that took place after battles. Archaeological findings, such as human remains with cut marks and signs of cooking, offer further evidence of these rituals. As European colonization spread, the influence of Christian missionaries contributed to the decline of such practices. However, the legacy of the Hurons' cannibalistic rituals provides insight into a culture where life, death, and spirituality were intricately woven, and where consuming the enemy was seen not just as an act of violence, but as a sacred, transformative rite. The full meaning behind these practices remains elusive, hidden within the oral traditions and the quiet remnants of a time long past. In the forests of northeastern North America, the Huron people once practiced a chilling and mysterious ritual, cannibalism. But this was no random act of savagery. For the Huron, consuming the flesh of their enemies was an act laced with deep spiritual significance, tied to power, strength, and honor. Warriors would often take prisoners during raids or battles, and the ritual of cannibalism was reserved for these captives, those who had fought valiantly or possessed spiritual significance. To the Huron, consuming their enemies was a way to absorb their strength and manitou, the life force believed to reside in all beings. It was not only a symbol of dominance but also a way to prevent the spirits of the defeated from returning to haunt them, ensuring that their power remained firmly in the hands of the victors. The act was carried out with ritualistic precision. The victim, often after enduring torture or humiliation, would be prepared for a ceremonial feast, with high-ranking warriors and chiefs taking part in the consumption. For the Huron, this act was not just physical. It was spiritual, believed to cleanse the warrior and transfer the enemy's power. Archaeological evidence, such as bones with clear signs of ritual dismemberment, supports these accounts. Yet, the true scale of Huron cannibalism remains unclear. Was it a widespread practice, or reserved for the most sacred of ceremonies? The history of the Hurons' rituals may be sealed in time, but the mysteries surrounding their practices continue to linger, inviting us to reconsider how death, power, and spirituality intertwined in their world. In the heart of the American Southwest lies Chaco Canyon, a site known for its massive stone structures, astronomical alignments, and the mysteries of a long-lost civilization. Yet, buried within its ancient ruins lies a chilling enigma, evidence of cannibalism. The question remains, did the people of Chaco Canyon, once the thriving center of the ancestral Puebloans, engage in ritualistic or survival cannibalism? Archaeological excavations at Chaco Canyon have revealed human remains that suggest a violent and grim past. Fractured bones, signs of butchery, and marks indicating the consumption of human flesh have been found in several sites, raising unsettling questions about the events that unfolded here. Did these bones tell a story of ritualistic practices, where consuming human flesh was a way to honor ancestors, gain strength, or appease gods? Or did they point to something more desperate, survival cannibalism during times of extreme drought, famine, or warfare? The evidence is fragmented, and interpretations vary. Some researchers argue that the remains show signs of ritualistic sacrifice, possibly in times of social upheaval or after the violent collapse of the Shikoan society. Others suggest that the cannibalism was a response to a catastrophic event, such as a prolonged drought that ravaged the region and left the inhabitants with no other options. Yet, the true motives behind these cannibalistic acts remain elusive. Was it spiritual, symbolic, or driven by pure survival? The answer may be hidden in the canyon's ancient walls, waiting to be uncovered, leaving us to ponder. How far would a society go to maintain its way of life? And what does it reveal about the fragile balance between civilization and catastrophe? In the arid deserts of the American Southwest, the Anasazi, later known as the ancestral Puebloans, built sophisticated cliff dwellings and thriving communities in places like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. However, beneath the grandeur of their architectural feats, a darker mystery looms. Evidence of cannibalism. The question remains, did the Anasazi, revered for their advancements in agriculture, pottery, and astronomy, resort to consuming human flesh? Archaeological findings suggest the possibility. Fractured bones, signs of burning, and cut marks on human remains have been uncovered in several Anasazi sites, indicating that at least some members of this ancient society engaged in cannibalistic practices. But the motives behind this behavior are still fiercely debated. Some scholars believe that cannibalism among the Anasazi was part of a ritualistic or ceremonial practice, perhaps tied to war or religious beliefs. Consuming the flesh of enemies could have been seen as a way to absorb their strength or to honor them in death. For others, the evidence suggests something more grim, cannibalism born out of desperation. During times of prolonged drought or resource scarcity, the Anasazi may have turned to extreme measures in order to survive, especially as their communities faced environmental collapse. Yet, there is still no clear consensus. Was the cannibalism symbolic, spiritual, or a grim necessity? Did it mark the end of a once thriving civilization, or was it an isolated practice, rooted in particular moments of hardship or warfare? The truth, buried in the arid earth, remains elusive, and as we continue to explore these ancient sites, the question lingers. What drove the Anasazi to this dark act, and what does it reveal about the fragility of human societies when faced with collapse? In the fertile river valleys of the American Midwest, the ancient city of Cahokia once thrived as the heart of a vast Mississippian civilization. At its peak, it boasted monumental mounds, complex social hierarchies, and bustling trade networks. Yet beneath the grandeur of Cahokia's cultural achievements lies a darker, unsettling mystery, evidence suggesting that cannibalism may have been practiced within its society. Archaeological excavations at Cahokia have uncovered human remains that raise chilling questions about the rituals and practices of its people. Some bones show signs of violent trauma, with cut marks and fractures that suggest butchery, evidence that may point to cannibalistic acts. These findings have led researchers to wonder whether the Mississippians consumed human flesh as part of their spiritual or social practices. Was it a means of asserting dominance during warfare, a way to absorb the strength of defeated enemies, or was it part of ritual sacrifices to appease the gods? Some anthropologists suggest that the cannibalism may have been linked to the collapse of Cahokia itself. Around the time that the city began to decline, possibly due to environmental changes, resource depletion, or internal conflict, it is theorized that the practice of cannibalism may have escalated as a desperate response to social unrest and scarcity. This interpretation draws parallels with other ancient civilizations that resorted to extreme practices in times of crisis. Yet, the full truth remains clouded in mystery. Was the cannibalism ceremonial, ritualistic, or driven by survival? Could these acts have been a sign of cultural decay, or were they an essential part of Cahokian belief systems? As we continue to examine the bones and artifacts uncovered in Cahokia's ancient mounds, one question lingers. What drove this once great civilization to such extremes, and what secrets does the soil of Cahokia still hold?